Okay, so we are live on Facebook. I'm Jess Renke. I'm the property manager and event director at the Crest Pavilion. I'm joined by Morgan Mann, who is the community relations director at the Door County Library System.
Hello.
And then also Janine Brennan, who is our interim branch manager at the Egg Harbor Library.
Hello.
So thanks everybody for joining. We've been pretty successful, knock on wood, with these live streams, but it may break at some point if you're watching on Facebook Live. So just know that we'll do our best to quickly put a new link up there. However, the whole thing will be available afterwards online. So with that, I'm excited to introduce Cinnamon Raftsman, who is the development director and communications director of the Door County Land Trust. Thank you, Cinnamon, for having us, being on today.
Hi, Jess. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Should I get right into it?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So today we're going to do a virtual hike through the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve. And Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve is one of 15 places that's featured hiking nature preserve with the Door County Land Trust. So we have 4 nature preserves on Washington Island, and then we have another 11 spread out through the mainland. These places are all free and open to the public for hiking, skiing, nature watching, bird watching, all of these things. And most of the trails are fairly easy to hike and just really wonderful places to explore. So during this time, we're really encouraging people to get outside, get some fresh air, get in some sunlight if you can. If you're not able to be in Door County, you can definitely follow us along on Facebook and Instagram and see wonderful things that are happening in Door County. We do want everybody to stay connected with us during this time. A little bit about Door County Land Trust. We are a member-supported nonprofit organization. So everyone who makes a donation to the Land Trust is considered a member, and that is how we are able to keep these places free and open to the public. So if you are already a member, thank you. And if you're not yet a member, consider joining us at some point. So the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve is about 445 acres. And it's located right within the city limits. This land was once owned by the Sturgeon Bay Utility Company, and it was slated to be a coal-powered electrical plant. And thanks to a lot of people in the area who recognized how special this land was, there was a ton of community support, and we were able to purchase the property in 2009 to protect it as a nature preserve. And you can see a little bit in this aerial photograph. If you see these lines of trees here, and you can see them on both sides of the canal, those are actually a ridge and swale formation that's relatively unique, and it creates a lot of different habitat types along Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal. So we have beach dunes along the shoreline here, and then there's hemlock forest and wetlands in the low-lying areas here, and it goes all the way back to more of an open field that at one point was even farmed until the nutrients in the soil were depleted. So here you can see the main part of the preserve is this area here. And you can see that it goes right up to the canal. So there's great views of the water. There's a trail that goes through the woods here, and you'll be able to go out on the pier. You can see this gorgeous lighthouse, and you can go right up to the beach and the shoreline. Now the water is much higher now than it is in this picture. So you're not able to walk right along the shoreline, but you are able to go on each side of the shoreline from the trails there. One of the beautiful things about this place is these low-lying wetlands. So the ridge and swale formations have been created over the last 10,000 years. We had glaciers that were pressing down on the land here, and as those glaciers receded and the land bounced back up once it was released from the weight of the glaciers, and the melting water created these varied lake levels within Lake Michigan, over the last 10,000 years, it's created about 25 ridge and swale formations along the shoreline here. And because of those transitions of the dunes right up along the shore and then the wetlands, there's literally like 25 gradations of different kinds of habitat. So there's just a lot of amazing plants and trees and just a lot going on in this area. One of the features that you'll see in areas that were once farmed there was kind of a younger transitional forest. The picture I just showed you has the older old growth hemlock forest. So there's a lot of different habitat here, which attracts a lot of different types of wildlife.
Cinnamon, I just saw from Janine that she hiked it last week and then started more again.
Oh, fantastic. That's wonderful. Anybody who's out hiking the trails, we're encouraging everybody, send us your pictures. If you see trash and things along the trails, by all means, pitch in and help out. We don't have volunteers and staff going out on the trails routinely right now. We're just on kind of an emergency only basis. So any help that you can and offer to keep the places clean and neat, that's wonderful. Thank you. So the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal is really easy hiking, so it's great for families to get out. It's one of the best places that you can go with a family because the trails are relatively short and, like I said, really level, and there's a ton of stuff to see. One of the most interesting things about the western part of this nature preserve is that Strawberry Creek goes through part of the protected land. And this is a place where the Wisconsin DNR has a fish collection facility. They collect salmon eggs, and then they take those eggs to a facility and they hatch them into young fry and they release them in the springtime. And right now, this is one of the best quality fish hatchery sites in Wisconsin. They're releasing more salmon from Strawberry Creek and Sturgeon Bay than they are anywhere else in Wisconsin. So that's kind of an exciting thing, and it's partly because the land protected is protecting that really high quality stream habitat for the salmon to be able to come in and spawn. And another thing that's at Ship Canal is there are many rare and endangered and very special plants there. But among those most special plants is the Pitcher's Dune Thistle that's pictured on the right here. Pitcher's Dune Thistle is being studied by the Chicago Botanic Garden staff. They come out and research the plants every year. And you can see in the pictures here, they mark with flags some of the new plants that are coming up, and they collect the seeds. They're tracking how many young plants there are and how many plants there are that are flowering. They're answering the question about how those rare plants are affecting the pollinators in the area. And right now, the Dune thistle population at Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal is one of the best among all of Lake Michigan shorelines. So our population in Sturgeon Bay hasn't been affected by this evil weevil that bores into the seeds and kills them. So we have this really wonderful, very robust community of these plants here. And there's a lot of bees and insects and pollinators that are attracted to them. You can see from this chart that the Chicago Botanic Garden put together, the Pitcher's Dune Thistle is that second one down called Cirsium pitcheri. This is a chart of when the flowers on the dunes are blooming. And you can see that Pitcher's Dune Thistle is the only thing on the dunes that's blooming from about mid-June to early July. And that means that without that rare plant, all of the pollinators that were in the area would have to go someplace else to find food for themselves. And then that starts to affect the plants that are blooming later in the season because they're not pollinated. The pollinators have already left to move in to a different area. So we tell this story because lots of people ask the question, why is this one rare endangered plant so important? Or what does one plant or one insect make a difference? And this just really illustrates how this single plant that's doing so well at Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal really is a cornerstone species within this entire ecosystem on the dunes. So that is the story of our land protection there. I am going to turn it over to Dale and Mary Goodner. Dale and Mary are volunteer naturalists with Door County Land Trust. They've been working with us for, I want to say 5-6 years, volunteering and leading hikes with us. And they're going to share through videos and stories some of the unique things that you'll see along your hike at Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve. So Dale?
Yes. Well, thank you, Cinnamon, for that outstanding orientation to this incredible site. You know, we've been going up there. You said 5 or 6 years. I thought it was maybe be a little more than that even. You know, it's like the frog said, time's fun when you're having flies. But this, the time that we've spent there has really been amazing. That diversity there is what's really attracts us. I don't know, Cinnamon, if you were along with us, we did a bird hike last year, and we walked along that trail that's real close to the lake from the parking lot. It goes, you know, just west of those 2 red dots, the other trail that's just in the woods. And when we broke out of the woods right there in the clearing, I'll tell you what, we were looking at probably maybe 4 or 5 good-sized cedar trees in that opening, and the whole group that was with us, we got to look at a minimum, I would say, of 10 warblers species, and 10 species. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. For some of the folks, they'd never seen warblers, you know, neotropical migratories before, and it was quite the eye-opener. There were a lot of oohs and ahs from the group, and I love to see that. There is a migratory corridor along the shore of Lake Michigan, and that's the other real benefit, I think, to the Ship Canal. It's right there. And when those birds are migrating northward, some of them nest up in Canada. And right about now is a great time to be out there. Yesterday we were over there and we saw yellow rump warblers and
black-throated green.
Yeah, black-throated green warbler. And that's a gorgeous bird. Black-throated greens do nest there. And so that's it's worth the trip out there now, because you never know from day to day what you're going to find. The migratories are moving through. I've seen ruddy turnstones right down there by the lake, and that's an Arctic bird. And by the way, that brings up something. I think the Ship Canal, well, the Door Peninsula is tied to the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. We have birds in the winter that are found here, like, for example, the long-tailed duck used to be called old squaw, and they will nest all the way up by the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, and they winter right here. And so throughout the year, there's something interesting always to see up there.
Can I just say a couple of things, just so, I don't know how many people know Dale, but he was an interpretive naturalist for the Peoria Park District at Forest Park Nature Center for his pre-retirement life. And when we came up here, he's still doing the tour guide sort of thing. He was also the chief naturalist and manager at Forest Park Nature Center for how many years?
A lot of years.
So I'm here because I'm the one that's doing the videography.
She's our cinematographer. Well, I'm from originally, and so was Mary, from this area. She grew up by Crockle, and I'm from Green Bay originally. My grandmother had a place up by Cave Point, and so I grew up in that woods. And after I retired, we just had to come back, you know. And
luckily we found out about the Door County Land Trust, because we have spent many hours in a number of your parcels.
Well, because I grew up here, this ecosystem is very special to me, and I am eternally grateful to the Door County Land Trust. They do such a wonderful job.
Thank you. Well, that's a good segue. Let's get started on this nature hike. So what we have lined up today, we have a series of videos that Dale took when he was out on the preserves. I should say Mary was the videographer, and Dale pointed out some really great things along the path. So we're going to start from this parking lot right here, and we're going to watch the videos going down this trail and along this loop. And then we're going to watch some things about this other part here. So the way that we have this set up is each video is about a minute, minute and a half long. And if you want to ask questions, you can use the chat feature to ask questions. And right after the video, Dale's going to be able to answer any questions that you have about those different videos.
Well, maybe some.
Hopefully. Hopefully.
We'll do our best. But this is really supposed to be an interactive hike. If we were actually out on the preserves, one of the best things about taking a guided nature hike is that you're able to say, what the heck is that? And ask questions about where you are. And it's those questions and that kind of wonderment and experiencing nature that really leads to a lot of learning and inspires people interest in nature. So that's what this is all about. So feel free to chat and ask questions if you want. All right, without further ado, our first step is going to be the signs of spring with Dale and the Balsam Poplar.
Here we are in the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve of the Door County Land Trust. And as you can see right here next to me is a little tree. It's referred to as balsam poplar because of the odor attached with comes with the buds and such. Kind of a resin. You squeeze the buds. And there's a product called a balm that has been used for many, many centuries that comes from this, and they call it the balm of Gilead. There's a little song that goes along with this. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to soothe the sin-sick soul. Anyway, enough of that. I thought, in a manner of speaking, the nature preserves throughout the Door Peninsula really are sort of a balm in Gilead, in a manner of speaking. When you come into a nature preserve, you can see such birds as chickadees just going about their business, feeding. Sometimes they'll even do their little songs and call notes while it's snowing. They could care less about our pandemics and wars and various tribulations around the world. They just do their thing. It's very grounding when you realize that we're not the most important things after all. To them, it's irrelevant what we do. And so, yeah, like Henry David Thoreau said, we need the tonic of wildness. And certainly, back in some of these locations, that's what you find, the tonic of wildness. It's well worth getting into the habit of coming and visiting these sites often and just take a walk.
There you go. So can everybody hear okay? Give a thumbs up if you're hearing everything okay. All right, that's good.
Video was a little quiet initially, and then I think that if you turned it up on your end, maybe that helped.
Okay. Yeah, I tried to turn it up as much as I could.
And when you did, it sounded fine here.
Yeah, initially it was kind of quiet.
Okay, sorry about that. So do we have some questions about that area of the nature preserve?
I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody.
So there are some other places where you can see balsam poplar growing up too. So if you visit the the Blufflands Nature Preserve, there is a lot of balsam poplar that grows along the trail there on the lower level.
You know, Cinnamon, it's worth noting that the balsam poplar is a northern species, and we are roughly at the southernmost boundary of its natural range.
That's interesting. So being at the southernmost boundary of its natural range, that happens a lot in Door County for different species because we're cooled by Lake Michigan. We actually have a lot of Arctic boreal types of plants here, and you'll see a little bit of that at the Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal. If you go, you'll see fir and other things that you would normally find much further north in the Arctic Circle. All right, well, let's go on to the next video if there's no questions about this one. But again, feel free to ask questions anytime. Dune Goldenrod.
Right here at the Ship Canal Nature Preserve, we do have one of the threatened species protected in this site. It won't be in bloom. It's Dune Goldenrod. It won't bloom until probably August, maybe up into even September. But right now you can see evidence of it if you look closely. And learning how to observe this stuff is part of the secret to telling some of the species that we find. The foliage on the Dune Goldenrod, it gets wider, farther away from the stem itself. The wide spot is toward the ends of the leaf. It's called oblanceolate, fancy word, and it's just one of the interesting plants that we find. And later on in the season, we'll see it as it grows up, and you can see the form much better. But there is evidence of some of that stuff right now.
All right. So the Dune Goldenrods, those will start blooming, I think, in July, Dale. Do you know when those bloom?
Well, you're probably right, Cinnamon. July, August, up into September, and you find some really great little bees and different insects that, like you were talking about, some of the pollinators that visit that goldenrod. Goldenrods, to me, are a very fascinating group. What does Wisconsin have? A couple of dozen species.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the rarest. But you sure find it at Ship Canal.
Sure. So one of the primary projects that we've been doing at Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal is a dune restoration project where we go through and remove the invasive species that are there so that the native plants can continue to thrive there. And since we've started that restoration project about 5 years ago, we've seen a lot of the rare and threatened plants along the dunes are really starting to come back in a really good way. So, yeah. So it's a great place to visit during the summertime. Of course, very windy this time of year.
And Morgan asked if people can help with the restoration. Sorry, Morgan, I don't mean to have you muted. I'm unmuting.
There are opportunities to help. Right now, we're not accepting any volunteers out on the land right now, but once we do get back into regular operations and volunteers are able to come out with us, we do have lots of different projects that volunteers are able to help with. When Chicago Botanic Garden comes during the summer, there's sometimes very little notice because it's so weather dependent and bloom dependent when they visit. But if you want to help out with projects that are on the dunes, definitely we have a contact form on our website. You can send us an email, volunteer@doorcountylandtrust.org, and we will get back to you with the different kinds of projects. Besides dune projects, there are always things like helping to maintain trails. We do a lot of projects that are about restoring habitat. So pulling out small invasive plants like garlic mustard or honeysuckle shrubs or buckthorn shrubs. That's something that we're constantly working towards. So yeah, definitely. Let's see, let's keep going down the trail. So this is all along the trail. Sorry about that. This is all along the trail near that first parking lot area. Let's see.
Here we are at Door County Land Trust, Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal Nature Preserve. And there's something here, there's a great little sign of spring that you can watch for. What you notice are up here, you can see these are the catkins on what we call hazelnut or filbert. And the wild hazelnut grows all along this trail here. What's interesting right now though, here we are at the 5th of April. And if you look very closely, you can see the catkin is the male part of the flower. The female part of the flower is very, very tiny. You tip your binoculars backwards and get up very close and look through the big end down to the little end, and it acts as a microscope. You can see the definition on these very, very red, small flowers.
So Dale, that was on April 5th. What do those catkins look like now?
They've really elongated. I'd say they're double, maybe triple the size they were back then. But it's one of those signs of spring when you start going early out to the nature preserves. A lot of people overlook these because they're so small. Very understandable.
And the little flowers are now much larger. I mean, the little flowers, you don't see the little tips of flowers anymore. You see the actual, what would it be, the flower that's on it?
Yeah, the reason that flower is so insignificant compared to a lot of other flowers, hazelnut is wind pollinated. And so when you think about it, the flower doesn't have any need to do what we call marketing. You know, the very large, showy, colorful blossom that tells insects over here. So they don't put a lot of energy into very large flower production. But I'll tell you what, when I was a kid, I used to gather hazelnuts up near Cave Point. And it's just a plant that I've always really liked. It's good to see it at the Ship Canal. It's a beautiful little shrub.
And Amy said, thank you for the tip on using the binoculars backwards.
It does make an effective microscope.
Wow.
When I first saw you doing that, I started to wonder about you, Dale.
Well, you're not the first person, Cinnamon.
All right. Well, let's go on to the next segment of the trail. Let's see. Okay. Next video. Whoops. All right. Signs of spring with the pileated woodpecker.
Sometimes when you're walking through a nature preserve, you can get a pretty good idea of some of the animals that are here by looking for evidence. And we have some of that right here. If you look at this cedar tree over here, you'll notice that there are holes that are squared off, and that's very distinctive. That's a sign pileated woodpecker has been at work here. And the pileated is a woodpecker that's just almost the size of a crow. They're very large, kind of black. When they fly, they have a white wing flash, and they've got a red top knot on their head. Kind of like the cartoon character Woody Woodpecker, I think, is modeled after pileated. Now, on the ground, oftentimes what you do, if you look down, you'll notice littered on the ground, there are chips of wood. That is what it's a sign that the pileated has been at work. And they have a taste for carpenter ants, and they certainly like to burrow into trees and try and see what they can find back in.
So I can tell you, I grew up in Door County, and I have never seen so many pileated woodpeckers as I have in the last couple of years.
They've been making a huge comeback in general. When the forests of Wisconsin were leveled, they took away a lot of habitat for pileatids, and that population collapsed, which is what happens when we remove habitat. But as the forest has been maturing and you find more and more trees of standing dead wood that have carpenter ants, there's a lot of good habitat for pileatids. By the way, some people will say, no, it's pronounced pileated. Well, the English pronunciation is pileated, according to the dictionary. But in Latin, they're named for their crest, which has been referred to as a pileus, which is Latin for mushroom. So if you pronounce it in Latin, it's pileated.
So Dale, do the pileated woodpeckers eat the emerald ash borers? Is that one of the reasons why we see so many of them now?
You know, I don't think that pileated woodpeckers are fussy. If you find a larvae of some sort in there, that's lunch. I don't know that, but it would surprise me if they didn't.
And I've heard that pileated woodpeckers will actually nest inside the tree. Is that true? Do they carve out a nest?
A lot of woodpeckers do. They nest in a hollow in the tree, and we run into trouble with some such woodpeckers as the red-bellied and the red-headed, because what will happen is the starlings will find that nest that they built, and they'll evict them and take over the hole in the tree. And so, yeah, there's a little bit of a dynamic going on out there. That's one of the problems with these invasive species, such as the starling.
Sure. That's interesting. Well, I just want to remind everybody, if you're just joining us too, feel free to ask questions anytime. We're going to try to answer questions as we go. So if you have questions, Dale is an expert on many things here.
Not very many, actually.
Jamie says that she has a pileated woodpecker in her tree in Egg Harbor. It's beautiful. Tree was dead and cut down to about 8 feet, and it loved it. I'm going to unmute you, Jamie, if you have anything else to add.
Wow, that's cool.
You know, it wasn't recently. We obviously haven't been able to come up to our place up there, but yeah, we got some good pictures of it too. So it was really unique to see. It was nice.
Nice.
Good.
So next up here, we have how to tell hemlock from balsam fir trees. Now, these are two of my favorite trees. And if you go to Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal, you will walk down one of the trails that has these magnificent old hemlocks that form a cathedral over the trail. It's just stunningly beautiful. You'll find a lot of pictures of that on our website and our Facebook page too. So here we go.
The nature preserves in the Door County Land Trust are just wonderful places to see a lot of species diversity among trees. And here we've got a couple of typical coniferous trees that you're going to encounter out here. They both have a flat needle. And if you look at them, they look pretty much the same. One of them, the needles are smaller. On the balsam fir here, the needles are slightly larger. This is a hemlock. And if you take this little test, rub the needle between your fingers. And if it doesn't roll, it's a fir or a hemlock. If it rolls, it's got a square cross section, and that would be more like a spruce, for example. What's interesting between these two, in order to identify the tree, is that the fir has what's called a sessile needle placement, and that is that the base of the needle attaches to the twig, just almost like a little tiny suction cup. And here on the hemlock, it's got a little tiny stalk at the base of the needle, and that stalk holds it to the twig. And it's called a peduncle. And this is kind of an interesting way that you can verify whether you're looking at a hemlock or a fir. And just something that's kind of interesting to me, there's a tree called the Douglas Fir out west. And the Douglas Fir, referred to as a fir, obviously there was a little mistake, and the scientific name is pseudotsuga, which means false hemlock. And the Douglas Fir, like the hemlock, does have a little peduncle at the base of the needle.
So Dale, I've also heard that hemlocks, if you look on the underside, they have these little tiny needles that look like stitching on the bottom.
Yeah, there is a pattern to the bottom side of the needle also. That's a really good point, Cinnamon. And I'd like to make sure that people understand, there's a lot of misunderstanding about this. You've heard of Socrates and hemlock juice? That plant is a herbaceous plant, the poison hemlock, and that has nothing at all to do with the hemlock tree. There's nothing toxic about a hemlock. It's the reason that they named the tree hemlock is because there's an odor, if you crush up the needle, that's reminiscent of poison hemlock. It's just kind of interesting. The scientific name of hemlock is a Japanese word. And I don't know of any other plant that has a scientific name that's Japanese. It's called tsuga, T-S-U-G-A, tsuga. If you're familiar with Japanese art, they have these very, very graceful, absolutely beautiful tapestries. The hemlocks of Japan are gorgeous.
And I've heard that a lot of Door County was covered in hemlocks before it was forested and settled completely.
Very, very true. And oftentimes they did not use the wood. They cut the hemlocks down back in the late 1800s and used the bark. It has a tannin to it that's it gives it a warm reddish glow to leather when it's tanned. And they shipped the bark across Lake Michigan over to
Is it Manistee?
No, Manistee is way north.
Munising?
No, Munising is even farther north. I forgot where they, well, see my memory.
Is it north? All right.
And over to Michigan. But that, yeah, the bark was what they were after. And so it's interesting to note that Tom Toft, up there at by near Bailey's Harbor on Toft's Point, he did not do that. He kept his hemlocks intact. So the Toft Point Preserve, which is managed by the University of Wisconsin, I believe, that area still has ancient hemlock. And it's interesting. But you're good point, Cinnamon. That was one of the really important trees of the Dore Peninsula. It still is.
Let's see, let's keep moving along here. This area that's right behind Dale in the video, you'll see if you go out towards the pier and look back towards the shoreline.
Behind me, you can see the silhouettes or the tops of these huge white pine. This is typically what you'll notice around the entire Dore Peninsula. The white pine grows up straight and tall with a nice straight bole, and those little fine 5-needle clusters, they look so fine and soft when you're up close, but in the distance, they have a stoutness, a blockiness about them. It's kind of interesting. That's just a gorgeous tree, and it's really kind of a signature of the Dore Peninsula. And what they form is you can almost think of it as almost an exclamation point rising above the rest of the forest. Beautiful.
Let's see. Did you want to add anything to that, Dale?
Well, only when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time up in white pine. I was a tree climber, but the white pine was one of my absolute favorites. I almost climbed up into a porcupine once. You know, then the lesson is be sure to look up before you grab the branch.
Whoops.
Janine, what did you mention about UWGB in the comments?
Toft Point is managed by UW Green Bay.
Green Bay, that's right. Yeah. And you know, the fellow that was really part of that back when that all took place was Keith White, Dr. White. And I had a couple of ecology classes from him, and I can't say enough good stuff about Keith White. What a guy.
Nice. Okay, so most of the videos that you've just seen are just in this front area of the preserve along this main trail here, but we're going to take a walk and stroll down this way and show you a couple of videos of the things that you find along the trails back here. Let's see, next up, wood frogs.
Here's another great sign of spring. This is the advantage of Philip County Land Trust maintaining all these various nature preserves around and the wide variety of habitats that you'll find in each place. Behind us, you can really hear one of the great prominent sounds of spring, the mating of the wood frog. And it's fascinating to watch these little critters. It's pretty cold out today, but it doesn't seem to bother them at all.
We were out there yesterday. You cannot believe the numbers of wood frog tadpoles right now.
Oh, really?
They are really, really out.
And yesterday there was not a sound from those frogs, nothing.
No, why is that? Is that because it's too cold or because they finished mating?
I think it's because they finished, Cinnamon.
Oh, okay.
Their work is done. You might, ensuring the next generation.
Sure. So I just learned last week that it's only the male frogs that make the calls because they're just attracting the females.
Yeah, that's true of birds too, and that's not uncommon. But there are a number of female birds that sing. The cardinal female sings, but for the most part, it's the male that does that. They're announcing that, hey, this is my place.
Interesting. Okay, let's go on. The next one here is yellow-bellied sapsuckers.
This year we've seen a number of yellow-bellied sapsuckers, which is a relatively small woodpecker. And they have a striking look about them, the black and white streaking on their head, the red coloration. But the field mark that I think is a good one to look for is when they land on a tree, they have a vertical white on their wing, a vertical white bar that it for sure tells them apart from the downy and the hairy. But what you do notice is evidence left behind by the yellow-bellied sapsucker that they've been here. And on this large old maple tree, this is what you see, rows of little holes in a horizontal line. That for sure tells you that there's been a sapsucker at work. And we've only actually seen them during migration. But they're around, and this is a great place for them to come, and you can, it's a great place to get a look at them.
That's a beautiful old maple. You know, I mentioned that we only see them during migration, but we are, again, at the southernmost extent of the yellow-bellied sapsuckers range. So if you go out in the woods often, you may find a nesting pair someplace. They're just, you know, as you know, the numbers will diminish as you get toward the southernmost extent of the range.
That's interesting. Let's see here. Okay, next up we have club mosses, and this is fascinating. There's just a ton of this at Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal.
Right here we've got some club mosses. There's the so-called fairy pine and ground cedar, and this little long spindly one, I believe it's called ground fir or some such. The club mosses as a group are found throughout the Dover Peninsula, and it's a pretty interesting plant. When you think about it, they've showed up in the fossil record just about 400 million years ago, and coincidentally, that's approximately the age of the Niagara dolomite found underlying the Dover Peninsula. So this and the dolomite have something in common. Part of the biodiversity that makes such a rich natural heritage of this region.
So
Yeah,
those
right. You made a good point, Cinnamon. They're found, a lot of those are found at the Ship Canal. And you know, the other thing is a club moss is not a moss at all. It's a lycopodium, and it does have vascular. It's one of the very first plants to have vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. And mosses, as you know, they lack vascular tissue. So it's a special plant. And a lot of the relatives of the club mosses were actually trees. And back around 300 million years ago, there were trees called lepidodendron. And those trees could grow up to be 100 feet high. And the lepidodendron back at that time is what gave rise to coal that we're burning today.
Mm-hmm.
That was a direct relative of our little club moss. All that's left of that family of plants are these little bitty guys.
That's kind of wild. And I always hear them referred to as princess pines.
Yeah, fairy pine, princess pine, they have a bundle of names.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're going to learn about some real pines. Here we go.
Here we have a couple more evergreen type trees, coniferous trees, only unlike the spruce and the fir, the needles don't line up along the twig. In fact, they're found in little clusters of needles. The pine to my right is the red pine, also known as the Norway pine. And on this one, the needles are rather long, and they're found in sets of 2. If you take a look at how that looks, you can see there are 2 needles, and there's a little cluster that come out of the same base. The white pine, which is on my left, these needles have a softness about them in the way they look. And these needles are in little clusters of 5 needles. And maybe you can see that. They come out of the same base also. If you look closely at these trees, that's one way to distinguish a white pine from a red pine rather readily.
And there's a lot of white pines and red pines growing along the dune area, aren't there?
Yes, the dominant one there is white pine, but that Norway pine is present. If you look at the Norway pine, it's got a reddishness to the bark plates. The white pine bark is almost black. It's real dark.
I have a question. Is that because the white pine and the red pine like sandy soil?
Yeah, I think you could say that. I know when I grew up by Whitefish Dunes area up there's a tremendous amount of white pine, but you also find a few red pine up there. Not a lot, but some of them. I would guess they would prefer a soil that's relatively well drained.
Mm-hmm. I think I've heard that they like dry feet, dry roots.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Cinnamon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's another pine, the tamarack, that likes that a little more wet feet. Interesting, if you look at the little clusters of needles on a tamarack, anywhere from 15 needles up to 20, 25 needles in a little cluster.
And is the tamarack a pine?
Yes.
Huh, I did not know that.
It's in the Pinaceae.
But it loses all of its needles in the fall,
Good point.
where most pines don't.
Yeah, right around Halloween, the tamaracks go golden as can be, and they're absolutely beautiful at that time of the year.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of tamaracks right now that are actually in standing water at the Oak Road Nature Preserve because the ephemeral ponds there are completely full of water.
Oh my God, I hope they don't kill off the trees.
I think they'll be okay. I think it just happens every spring for a little while, just a couple months, and then they...
Just so it subsides.
Yep. Okay, how to tell a spruce from a balsam fir.
A lot of the nature preserves throughout the Door County Land Trust are located near Lake Michigan. And the closer you get to the big lake, the more coniferous trees you tend to see. And a lot of folks are kind of interested in the difference between, for example, a spruce and a fir. And right next to me here is a balsam fir. And one of the ways of telling the difference is to just run your hand over the needles, which are lined up along the twigs, I might mention. And if you run your hand along it, they're kind of soft. Over here, we have a white spruce. And one of the words to describe a spruce when you rub your hand on the needles is ouchie. There's one more thing about a spruce and a fir that will help you determine which is which. You can take a needle off, just pull one needle off of a spruce, and you can roll it between your fingers because the needle on a spruce is square in cross section. If you take a needle off of a balsam fir and try to roll it, it will just slide because the needles on the fir are flat.
There you go. I love the smell of balsam fir. So if you get a chance to learn how to ID that one, you always have something to look forward to smelling in the woods.
Yeah. The word balsam refers to stinks good.
Really?
Well, the balsam poplar is like that too. It's got a very pungent odor about it with those sticky buds.
Nice. Nice. All right. Now, next up, let's see. The mysterious skunk cabbage. You know what? We get so many questions every springtime. I saw this thing in the woods. What is that? So here we go.
Here at the Ship Canal, when you come here early in the spring, latter part of March, you'll start seeing skunk cabbage, and you'll notice it coming right through ice. And some people have said, how could it possibly do that? Well, the skunk cabbage has an interesting characteristic. It tends to be exothermic. So as it grows up early on, it has an ability to melt the snow and the ice away from it, so it can actually come in and start forming a flower early on. if you start looking around some of these areas, it's amazing. For example, if you look down over here to my left, here we have more of them coming up, and then right behind them there is still more. The more you look at these things, the more of them you can see. Later on in the season, the skunk cabbage will be producing very large leaves, foliage, and so then you can really see where it is. Right now, it's a little inconspicuous, but it kind of reminds you of Jack and the Pulpit. That little hood that comes over the top and the little female part down in the middle. Our daughter used to call it Jack in the apartment. But anyway, interesting little plant.
Nice. So Dale, how did that plant get the name of skunk cabbage?
That's a very good question. I was making the assumption without looking into it. A lot of plants have the odor of carrion, rotting meat, and that smell is what attracts slugs and flies to do the pollination, and right down near the ground. And the hint is the flower is way down low, so it'll attract certain pollinators. I hope I'm not misstepping on that, but I was just assuming that from back in the good old days. The odor is crucial. Now the other obvious guess would be that there may be a pungent smell of skunk-like smell when you break the leaves. But I'll tell you what, that skunk cabbage right now, when you're out there by Ship Canal, it's amazing how much of it there is. It's really obvious today. The leaves are getting really big.
Where we normally see it is right along, is it Lake Road?
Lake Road, yeah, on the way in.
On the way toward the parking lots on either side of the road. It's just amazing.
I have a trail map that I'll show here right at the end, so people can ask questions about where to see things. And I'll point out where the skunk cabbage can be found there. Let's see. I think we're down to one of our last little videos here. Masses of frogs.
Here we're looking at these swells and swales, the typical ridge formation that's so common along Lake Michigan. And in between the ridges in the swales themselves, water accumulates, and as you might hear, the frogs are taking advantage of it. If you look right down over here, you can see what these frogs are up to. After all that singing and so forth, right off the end of my stick here is an egg mass, and that contains a whole bunch of little tadpoles or pollywogs or whatever you want to call them. And so in the fairly near future, we're going to have this water alive with these things. Oh, by the way, right now you also notice along the surface, we've seen a number of water striders, insects that use surface tension of the water itself to convey themselves over the top and see whatever they can find that they can feed on. And just under the surface is water boatmen, and they move along with little, almost like little paddles. It's a pretty interesting collection of life that takes advantage of this water. It's quite magical, pretty amazing.
I love the sounds of those frogs. So
Yeah.
Dale, when you're pointing out the frog eggs, can you see like little round visible eggs in there?
Yeah, the eggs are kind of a translucent gray or light tan, and in the center you'll see this little dark, looks like a little comma inside early on. It's like black, but when those little pollywogs hatch out, which by now they have done, many of them have now changed to be more of a brownish color, and they're laying on each other across that egg mass. It's astonishing how many of them there are. But you know, frogs, they need to overwhelm predation so that they'll always have a certain number that will survive. That's why they produce so many offspring.
Yeah, well, that brings us to the last of the videos, but if people have questions that they want to ask Dale, by all means, type those into your chat right now and ask some questions. While we're gathering up the questions, I'll just tell you a little bit about what the Land Trust is working on in 2020. We have 3 main project areas that we're working towards land protection. The Washington Island wetlands, and there's actually 4 different areas within Washington Island. There's Big and Little Marsh, Coffee Swamp, Detroit Harbor, and Little Lake. And each of those areas is a state natural area, which means that it's been designated by the state of Wisconsin as holding rare plants and rare habitat for wildlife. So we have projects that are lined up in each of those 4 areas this year. There's a lot of uncertainty about what is actually going to be completed and protected this year, but we're still working towards the protection of those places constantly. One of our main areas of focus this year also is the Gibraltar Ephraim Swamp Natural Area. And at Gibraltar Ephraim Swamp Natural Area, we have at least 3 or 4 parcels that are lined up to be protected. And we have some grant funding secured for a portion of the property fees to acquire those properties. And then we're still fundraising for parts of those acquisitions. So we hope to complete several of those again this year. And then the final place that we're working is Little Sturgeon and Sawyer Harbor Watersheds. And really that whole area of Southern Door that has a lot of stream corridors and wetlands that are kind of nestled in they're like pockets of wildlife habitat within a lot of agricultural areas. And we're working towards protecting some of those stream corridors and wetlands that ultimately are going to protect the fish habitat and improve the water quality before the water flows into Green Bay. So those are the areas that we're working this year. You know, our land protection efforts going forward always, and you know, it hasn't been stopped necessarily because of the pandemic. We're still continuing to work towards those places. So let's see, I think the next slide here is a map. Yes, indeed it is. So if you guys want to ask questions, any questions about Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal or questions about any of the other nature preserves, feel free to ask away. Let's see.
I'm going to unmute everybody. Amy says, great photo of the Gibraltar Ephraim Swamp. Really, and she says she really enjoys Dale and Mary's videos here. I'm going to unmute everybody.
We went to Gibraltar Ephraim Swamp this winter, and it was Chuck Lauder was there to co-lead with that group, and Amanda Pike. And I'll tell you what, we saw, you can't imagine the snow fleas that had come up and were on top of the snow. It was amazing.
There were so many, it made the snow look gray. It was pretty impressive.
They're little springtails and they come up out of the soil. And it's just, you know, what it gives you is some sense of the depth or the tremendous diversity of life below the surface.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Jess.
Oh, I was just going to say Frank had a question for Dale. If you want to go ahead, Frank.
Hi, Dale. Roughly where did you grow up? Because you mentioned Cave Point and Whitefish Dunes. We live out east of 57 across from the sheep farm and the bed and breakfast. So I was curious as to where you were referring to.
Do you know where the visitor center is at Whitefish Dunes State Park?
Oh, sure.
That was approximately the location of my grandmother's cabin.
Wow.
Oh, okay.
And we went back in the 50s. My mother used to force us to go there during the summers because at that time it wasn't coronavirus. We were escaping polio.
Wow.
Okay.
And darn it, we had to go up there and hang out in the most beautiful place in the world that you could possibly imagine.
If she had a shack there now, she'd be worried about falling into the water the way the waves are.
Yeah. Yeah. But what a place to grow up. And you know, I'm very grateful for that, because you think about it, when children have access to these areas of natural areas and they get fascinated by anything from spiders to you name it, it's a predictor. They're more apt to become interested in any branch of science. My older brother became a paleontologist, worked for Mobil Oil. But I, on the other hand, went for the big bucks. I majored in biology and became an interpretive naturalist.
You had the better choice.
And Cinnamon, are these videos, I know that they're part of the presentation, but do you guys have a YouTube channel too that people could look back and refer to?
Sure. The best places to find our videos are either on Facebook or on our website. So you can go to doorcountylandtrust.org and you can find our videos there. We have a page set up that people can also upload photos and videos that they've taken. So we put them through a quick review process, but then we share those on our Facebook and web pages also. So people can be interactive. And if you want to send in photos and videos of what's this, ask the naturalist. We are absolutely happy to help you learn about nature. So, and there's some other fun stuff on the website right now. We have a series of coloring book pages for kids. So you can download and print those pages. And we'll be having some fun ones this weekend for Mother's Day, some mama and baby animals. So yeah, lots of stuff on our website.
Nice, nice. Well, I think unless you, Dale and Mary, you have anything else to add, I mean, we could close.
Mary, you've been
No,
quiet.
just-
Why don't you add stuff?
Well,
I'll shut up.
we just want to thank you all for doing this. It's really nice to bring nature into our homes since we all can't be out there at this point in time. But still, if you can adhere to the social distancing and get out there, we highly recommend it.
Thank you so much to Cinnamon and Dale and Mary and Janine, everybody on Zoom that joined us and on Facebook. Again, thank you for your patience on this. It looks like our live stream did stay live, so thank goodness. And with that, Morgan, do you have any updates from the Door County Library and events that are coming up?
Sure.
Oh, shoot, you're muted. Here, let me unmute you.
What, cat got your tongue?
Wait, no, I mean, oh, there we go.
There she goes.
There. Well, thank you guys for doing this. My two younger sons really love going out to the nature preserves and walking around. So I'll be sure to share some pictures with you guys on the Land Trust website there. Coming up for the library, we are going to be having virtual craft time starting actually tomorrow at 9:30. And that's in our closed group on our Facebook page. It's the Storytime group. So join that if you want to start doing crafts on Fridays. And there'll be children's crafts. But of course, adults can join in too. We have a social distancing book club that we're doing at 2 p.m. on Fridays, where you can talk about the books or movies or things that you're reading and watching and listening to. And there's no specific title or anything like that. On Wednesday, May 13th, we have our dog training tips and tricks at 2 p.m. On Thursday, May 14th, we're getting to know RB Digital for magazines at 2 p.m. And on May the 18th, which is a Monday at 2 p.m., we're going to be having Jess and Janine talk about movies, reviews, critics, and shows that you can see on Hoopla during this time where we're all home. And on Thursday, May 21st, we are going to be joining John Harris talking about a history book called The Woman Who Smashed Codes, a true story of love, spies, and an unlikely heroine who outwitted America's enemies by Jason Thagon. And that is available on Overdrive as an ebook or e-audiobook, and also on Hoopla Digital as an e-audiobook. So join us for that. He does a history book twice a year with us. At 2 p.m., so right after that, we're having Mushrooms 101, where we're going to have Wildwood Gourmet Mushrooms give us a farm tour. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. And then our last book discussion of the month is going to be the Between the Pages book club. And we're going to be talking about The Lost Girls of Paris by Pam Jenoff. So you can come see us, the crew from Egg Harbor again, and talk about that book. So we hope you can come join us at some of these events.
Thanks, Morgan. Thank you again, Cinnamon and Dale and Mary and everybody who joined us today.
And thank you, Jess.
Yes.
And Cinnamon and Morgan.
Yeah, we appreciate it. This is an interesting, it's kind of a fun thing. I'm glad you guys are doing this.
Somebody had asked a question, and I don't know if they're still on, but I was going to show the map just one last time in case there was any questions about Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal. Whoops. But
We've got a lot of thank yous streaming in here on the Zoom chat. Everybody was really.
Sounds good. Well, thank you, everybody. And send us a message on Facebook if you have more questions.
Very good.
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank
Okay,
you.
bye.
Bye.